Today we're reading more of Stewart Little. This is chapter 2, called Home Problems. Stewart was also helpful when it came to ping pong. The Littles liked ping pong, but the balls had a way of rolling under chairs, sofas, and the radiators, and this meant that players were forever stooping down and reaching under things. Stewart soon learned to chase balls, and it was a great sight to see him come out from under the hot radiator, pushing a ping pong ball with all his might and the perspiration rolling down his cheeks. The ball, of course, was almost as high as he was, so he had to throw his whole weight against it in order to keep rolling. The Littles had a grand piano in their living room, which was all right, except that one of the keys was a sticky key and didn't work properly. Mrs. Little said she thought it must be the damp weather, but I don't see how it could be the damp weather, for the key had been sticking for about 4 years, during which there had been many bright, clear days. But anyway, the key stuck and was a great inconvenience to anyone trying to play the piano. It bothered George particularly when he played the scarf dance, which was rather lively. It was George who had the idea of stationing Stewart inside the piano to push the key up the second it was played. This was no easy job for Stewart, as he had to crouch down between the felt hammers so he wouldn't get hit on the head. But Stewart liked it just the same. It was exciting inside the piano, dodging about, and the noise was quite terrific. Sometimes after a long session, he would emerge quite deaf, as though he had just stepped out of an airplane after a long journey, and it would be some time before he felt normal again. Mr. and Mrs. Little often discussed Stewart quietly between themselves when he wasn't around, for they had never quite recovered from the shock and surprise of having a mouse in the family. He was so very tiny, and he presented so many problems to his parents. Mr. Little said that, for one thing, there must be no references to mice in their conversation. He made Mrs. Little tear from the nursery songbook, the page about 3 blind mice, see how they run. "I don't want Stewart to get a lot of notions in his head," said Mr. Little. "I should feel badly to have my son growing up fearing that a farmer's wife is going to cut off his tail with a carving knife. It is such things that make children dream bad dreams when they go to bed at night." "Yes," replied Mrs. Little, "and I think we had better start thinking about the poem. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. I think that it might embarrass Stewart to hear that mice mentioned in such a belittling manner." "That's right," said her husband, "but what shall we say when we come to that line in the poem?" "We'll have to say something. We can't just say 'twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring. That doesn't sound complete. It needs a worm to rhyme with house." "What about louse or grouse?" said Mr. Little. "I suggest souse," remarked George, who had been listening to the conversation from across the room. It was decided that louse was the best substitute for mouse, so when Christmas came around, Mrs. Little carefully rubbed out the word mouse from the poem and wrote in the word louse. Stewart always thought the poem went this way: "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a louse." The thing that worried Mr. Little most was the mouse hole in the pantry. This hole had been made by some mice in the days before Littles came to live in the house, and nothing had been done about stopping it up. Mr. Little was not all sure that he understood Stewart's real feeling about that mouse hole. He didn't know where that hole led to, and it made him uneasy to think that Stewart might someday feel the desire to venture into it. "After all, he does look a good deal like a mouse," said Mrs. Little and to his wife, "and I've never seen a mouse yet that didn't like to go into a hole." That is the end of chapter 2.